Morning, everyone. 37 days left. 37 days between now and October 21st, the election day for the 43rd election. And lots can happen in that amount of time. There's a ton of time between now and election. There's going to be debates, although not many will include Justin Trudeau, and not many will include Maxime Bernier, it seems, which seems concerning to me, as, well, one's the prime minister, and one's trying to be prime minister, and has more infrastructure than, well, the prime minister. Isn't that interesting? So, yeah, I think it's really interesting what's happening in this election cycle specifically. But here is a thread. And Greg made this thread, and I asked him if I could use it, and he said, yeah, absolutely. And man, I was going to start building a video like I usually build a video, but Greg did just a really, really good job. He's got his links in here and everything, so I'm going to link to the thread. Watch it for yourself. I'm going to explain something really quick before I go through this thread. I do this because sometimes people don't have access to Twitter. People don't have access to these threads. People don't have access to the time to sit down and look at this stuff or put it into context. And sometimes people have a hard time reading or reading with comprehension. It's Jordan Peterson that said this is a Gutenbergian evolution. And that means the printed word, the ability to print books en masse, made people smarter because a lot more people could read. And maybe more people can listen than can read. And that's why I do this. That's why I read the news out, because maybe more people can listen than can read, and maybe some people can get a benefit out of this. So that's why I do this. So if you've got Twitter, maybe this isn't for you. But if you don't have Twitter, or if you have a hard time with following what's going along, that's why I'm doing this. So let's have fun. Let's read this Twitter roundup that's not a Maxime Bernier Twitter roundup. And thanks a lot, Greg. He says, coincidence or corruption? 1. Canadians need to understand what's really happening with our country's political system. And it's got some 4 shady guys passing money and bills behind their back. 2. Let's take a look at an article from the Globe and Mail from June 6, 2017. This article leads to some very stunning conclusions. 3. Well, and it's got a picture of Kevin O'Leary calls for the Conservative Party to recount digital ballots. 3. Here's a link to the article, but we'll go through it piece by piece. This is incredibly important to understand. I think so too. And here's a link to the article. As I said, I'm not gonna distract more than that now. Number 4, Dragon's Den Shark Tank host Kevin Leary was a contender in the Conservative Party's leadership election. He called for a recount of the vote. And here's the thing. It says, former Conservative leader candidate Kevin O'Leary is calling on the federal party to recount the digital imprints of its ballots so that newly elected leader Andrew Scheer doesn't start his job with a cloud hanging over his head. Mr. O'Leary, who dropped out of the leadership race in April and endorsed then frontrunner Maxime Bernier, told the Globe and Mail that he sees, quote, no reason why a recount shouldn't occur. As a member and a former candidate, I would prefer that a recount be done because I think it clears a cloud that is obviously brewing at this point, Mr. O'Leary said in an interview. Number 5, apparently some party members and officials did not receive ballots. How many of them there were hasn't yet been determined. And that's true. And this was printed 17 hours ago. Today is, as I said, September 14th. So up to this date, nobody knows that the answer to that question. Okay, carrying on with the Globe and Mail. Former Conservative Cabinet Minister Jay Hill, who was Mr. Bernier's co-chair for Western Canada, posted a Facebook statement describing how he was unable to vote in the leadership contest, which was won by Mr. Scheer in the May 27 vote by a razor-thin margin. Quote, despite being a member of one of the legacy parties since 1987, the Reformed Party of Canada, an MP for 17 years and a cabinet minister for PM Stephen Harper, and contracting the party 3 times about my yet-to-arrive ballot, I never received a ballot, Mr. Hill wrote. I wonder how many other members were left disenfranchised by this fiasco. Mr. Hill said that he spoke to a party official about his mail-in ballot and was reassured it would be sent to him by priority post, but it never happened. Number 6, immediately after the vote count, the ballots were destroyed, and we were told that there would be no review. Here it is. Mr. O'Leary, who remained on the ticket and finished with a 1.07% of the vote on the first ballot, said he didn't agree with the decision to destroy the paper ballots immediately after the vote and believes the party should now review the digital copies. Quote, I favor transparency. It always works, he said. Conservative Party spokesman Corey Han, however, said there will be no review. The rules clearly state that once the vote is verified by the chief returning officer and by the independent auditor, they are final and binding, he said in an email. Number 7, there was a significant discrepancy of 7,466 ballots in the vote count that Maxime Bernier's team drew attention to. It was passed off as, quote, a data entry issue. Mr. O'Leary comments, come as the party grapples with a series of complaints made by the Bernier camp and an official from the Kelly Leach camp. The Conservative Party says that 141,362 voters were counted at the May 27 vote, but a list provided to the campaigns shows 133,896 votes tallied. Mr. Bernier, who led the voting until the final ballot, 13th ballot, has called on the party to explain the 7,466 vote discrepancy in the final ballot count. Party officials described the discrepancy as a data entry issue because those who voted in person were not on the list of the mailed-in ballots, and volunteers may have made mistakes as they entered more than 140,000 names. In a follow-up interview, Mr. Hill called on the party to investigate the spoiled or missing ballots. According to the party, there were 10,429 spoiled or incomplete ballots. Number 8, former Conservative Cabinet Minister Jay Hill was Bernier's co-chair in Western Canada. He also called for transparency. Back to the article, I think the party owes their membership an explanation, and furthermore, I think that the party owes Mr. Scheer an explanation. His potential credibility is damaged because of this. They should explain to him how this happened and how it will never happen again, he said. He added that Mr. Scheer should also be calling on the party to explain. He should be insisting upon a more thorough review of what happened, Mr. Hill said. It was met with a shrug and a hollow apology. Mr. Hand apologized to Mr. Hill, but said the party stands by the voting process. Mr. Hand noted the party's constitution outlines which voting system to use, and members will have the chance to amend it at the policy convention next year in Halifax. If you watch my show, you'll remember that. That was fun, right? Back to the article. Our apologies to Jay Hill that he never received his ballot in the mail. Our records show we mailed him a ballot on April 21st and a replacement ballot after we heard from him, and we sincerely regret that it did not arrive. I'm sure they do. And here's an iPolitics. Deloitte performs its work in strict accordance with the highest professional standards and takes seriously the confidentiality requirements of the work we do for our clients, Senior Manager Tanya Johnston told iPolitics on Tuesday. Our policies and our code of professional conduct prohibit us from discussing any information about clients or the work that we do for them. Following the initial wave of concerns over apparent irregularities in the ballot numbers, Party President Scott Lamb initially appeared to suggest that Deloitte had formally signed off on the numbers, telling Globe and Mail that it was an audited final result. An audited final result. Number 10, this is where it starts to get interesting. There's a company called Deloitte who is supposed to be in charge of auditing the ballot count. They provide audit, consulting, tax, and advisory services worldwide. 11, it appears, however, as though they didn't actually do an audit. They merely oversaw the ballot count. Here's the Globe and Mail. While Conservative Party President Scott Lamb told the Globe last week the results of the race were audited by Deloitte, former Conservative MP Bob Deschart, who supervised the vote for the late team, sorry, I've got that wrong, said the level of oversight was far lower. The Conservative Party acknowledged on Tuesday that Deloitte did not formally audit the leadership vote results. Dan Nolan, chairman of the Leadership Election Organization Committee, said Mr. Lamb misspoke. Quote, they would never audit a process like this. That wouldn't happen, Mr. Nolan said, but he said Deloitte monitored the count room and observed the counting of the ballots. 12, Mr. Scheer's office flat out refused to acknowledge that anything was wrong, and that's where this article ends, but that's definitely not where the story ends. And here's the Globe and Mail. For his part, Mr. O'Leary said he stands by Mr. Scheer as leader and hasn't spoken to Mr. Bernier since the day after the vote. Mr. Scheer's office has declined to comment on the allegations, calling them a party matter. Number 13, many people are familiar with the name David Johnston. He was Canada's Governor General from 2010 to 2017. Number 14, David Johnston has been involved with Deloitte for several years. He was featured on the cover of a document from a subsidiary of Deloitte called Omni Al, I believe. It's safe to say that Deloitte and Omnia Al think quite highly of David Johnston. Here he is. Canada's, maybe it's AI, Omni AI, could be AI. Canada's AI imperative. I don't think it's Canada's AL imperative. I'll carry on. So, former, you can see David Johnston is highlighted. He's the only one in the bottom there. Okay. 15. So much so they made him executive advisor on October 17th, 2017. Here's a press release, and we'll read it. Deloitte welcomes the Right Honorable David Johnston. Oh, isn't that great? 16. The mission statement is fairly cryptic. What is with these people and their transhumanist AI obsession? Yes, it is AI. I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to keep going. 17. Many of the ultra shady elites are into funding and developing AI. Amazing Polly, 99 Freemind, highlights Jeffrey Epstein's involvement and James Corbett's Why Big Oil Conquered the World, goes deeper into the subject. I highly recommend looking those up, but I digress. 18. Apparently Deloitte has had other accusations of meddling in Canadian in audits. Here's Deloitte officially intervened in Duffy audit, but firm denies interference. And here's another one, National Observer, how Deloitte masked the scandals in business and politics. 19. It was highlighted by Andrew Coyne in the National Post that the Canadian dairy industry was essentially responsible for the additional votes required to give Scheer the fractional win. Deloitte clearly provided the smokescreen for the cover-up. Here's the National Post. It says, Andrew Coyne, Tories cry foul as Maxime Bernier spills the beans or milk on leadership race. And that picture is real if you haven't seen it. It says, to my knowledge, the facts are not in dispute. Andrew Scheer won the Conservative leadership race last year by the narrowest of margins, less than 1% of the available points under the party's system of equal weighting of ridings. The difference was supplied by several ridings in Quebec, and specifically by the votes of thousands of dairy farmers. It wasn't that these Quebec dairy farmers had any great personal enthusiasm for Scheer. I imagine they'd be hard-pressed to pick him out of a crowd. Neither would most of them have any attachment to the party before or since they joined for one day and for one purpose, to vote for Scheer, or rather, to vote against Maxime Bernier, his nearest rival, and having completed that task, most of them were never seen again. And I did coverage of that, of all of these pieces as they came out. Anyway, 20. Again, this is not where the story ends. In fact, it gets even worse. Let's look a little more closely at David Johnston. He's pictured here with UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. These people sure get around. There we go. Here he is. All right. 21. On October 30th, 2018, the Liberal government changed the criteria for federal election debates, effectively blocking Maxime Bernier from being able to participate even though he's the leader of a federal party. All the other leaders are able to debate. And there's a link. 22, the very same day, the Liberal government picked David Johnston to head the newly formed Election Debate Commission. He has the power to decide whether Mr. Bernier speaks or not. None of the other leaders have publicly questioned it. 23, and here's Huffington Post with confirmation that David Johnston was tapped by Liberals to organize 2019 leaders' debates. 23, now, where else can we find David Johnston's name? How about the Trudeau Foundation members list for 2018 and 2019. Here we go. Here's the screenshot, because sometimes when you share a link, the information disappears. So there we go. The Right Honorable David Johnston on the foundation, the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation. And here is further links, right? So quite deep ties. 24. David Johnston has a charity of his own called Rideau Hall Foundation. It was started in 2012 to ostensibly carry out Johnston's vision of a smart, caring nation, according to its website. Here's the board of directors. Here he is. And 25. It is interesting, however, that Trudeau's government gave the Rideau Hall Foundation $10 million on September 28th, 2017. Here's the foundation for the Rideau Hall. It says the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, announced today a grant of $3 million and a commitment of up to $7 million in matching funds towards the RHF, a registered charity founded during the Johnston Mandate and created to amplify and extend the reach of the office of the Governor General today and into the future. Created in 2012 as a response to His Excellency David Johnston's vision for a smart and caring nation, the RHF has been supported for the past 5 years by donor philanthropy. Wow, there you go. Donors, philanthropy, and now Canadian government funds. 26. He has a short article from Newswire about the Rideau Hall Foundation. There's the link. 27. Not only was David Johnston handpicked by Justin Trudeau's government for the debates, so was the media who will be covering them. Here's Global News talking about the media, the handpicked media. Here they are. The 2019 official debates are produced by the Canadian Debate Production Partnership, which is made up of CBC News, Radio Canada, CTV News, Global News, Toronto Star, Huffington Post Quebec, La Presse, Le Devoir, L'Actuel. I think I've probably said that wrong. 28. CBC and Radio Canada are both funded by the federal government. 29. CTV is owned by AT&T, which also owns Time Warner, which is the parent company of CNN. So you can see that in that infographic there, linked. And 30, Global is run by Chorus, which is run by the Shaws. Shaw is a sponsor of Canada 2020, right? And 31, the Toronto Star was recently named as one of the three amigos by counterterrorism expert Tom Quiggin. I strongly suggest looking this up. This is a separate yet related rabbit hole. It's deep and dark and dirty. There's more, sorry. 32, the Huffington Post is every bit as far left as the CBC and Toronto Star. 33, La Presse is controlled by the Desmarais family. Sorry, I've got that wrong. One could also do a separate thread on this family. They, along with families like the Bronfmans, make up a large percentage of the Canadian swamp. Hardly surprising that the Desmarais family funds both parties. 34, Le Devoir is a Quebec nationalist publication, and they're as friendly to the Liberal Party as it gets. The editor-in-chief, Lucy Julien, sorry if I've got that wrong, is also the news director for Radio Canada. So isn't that convenient? I'm gonna say Lucy. Makes sense. 35, no, I'm not even gonna try it. Is owned by McLean Hunter, which is owned by Rogers, which is another sponsor of Canada 2020. And if you watched any of my show during Faith Goldie's mayoral run, you'll know that Rogers is owned and controlled by the mayor of Toronto, John Tory. Yeah, he's part of the Rogers Control Trust. It's a little board of directors that runs Rogers. So wouldn't that be nice if your board of directors was also the mayor of Toronto? Wouldn't that be wonderful? Anyway, 36. Former Conservative PM Brian Mulroney made a very interesting speech at a conference for Canada 2020. He clearly states that the cooperation between the Liberals and the Conservatives and the continuity of their efforts has led Canada to the place it's in today. And there's four little bits of this speech. So this is Canada 2020. It says, but it was this continuum of sensible and effective policies under four different governments led by prime ministers of different political stripes, avoiding the erratic policy lurches of the past that changed Canadian attitudes and provided the solid economic foundation on which Prime Minister Harper was able to stand when he welcomed the world leaders to Canada a few years ago. How did this happen? Well, it did not happen overnight, nor under one government or one political party. It happened because for the better part of almost 30 years, four governments of different political stripes followed similar economic policies that generated stable economic growth, solid job creation, sensible public financing, and more confident national fabric. The essence of community of governments from Mulroney through Chrétien and Martin to Harper explains a great deal of what is right about Canada today. No one should underestimate the value of this continuity. Serious public policy can only be conceived and practiced over decades, not 4-year terms. We have had the great good fortune to see governments of different stripes pass and accept the torch over the past 30 years rather than stop and then try to start a new game based on discredited ideologies or personal agendas. I mean, that's an interesting speech. Is that what happened in the last 30 years? Everybody was agreeing to implement the same policies regardless of who voted for what and who promised what? Interesting. 37. So let's recap. Canadian former Governor General is an executive advisor to Deloitte who okayed the election results for Scheer. He's a member of the Trudeau Foundation. He was handpicked to oversee the debates. His charity was given $10 million from Trudeau's government. 38. The media groups selected are all either far left, Liberal-controlled, government-funded, sponsors of Canada 2020, or run by the established corporations, or a combination thereof. 39. Is it clear now? The corruption is real and rampant. Both parties are controlled. These problems didn't start with Trudeau, and they won't end with Scheer. Is there any doubt as to why Maxime Bernier and the PPC are ignored and or trashed by the media? 40. They will keep doing this as long as we let them. They write laws to protect themselves, and we blindly follow them, allowing this corruption to continue. How long will we let them get away with this? 41. As soon as we figure out that the game is fixed and that we don't have to follow their rules, we can take back our country. Until then, we will be trampled on. 42. The only way we can do that is through the PPC. After that, it's the old-fashioned way. So that is a thread full of pertinent information and links. And I apologize, I'm not going to do my typical links because usually I would go through and find the links. But the way I would find the links is I would Google the title of the article. And 9 times out of 10, that brings up the article that I'm looking for. And the titles are all... You can find them all through this presentation. So please inform yourselves. An informed electorate is an electorate that knows everything that they can possibly know. And you can't know everything, right? You can't. It's impossible. So do your reading, do your research, and look around because, I mean, our news is slanted. Our news is editorialized, so it's difficult to suss out what's real and what's fake. As far as I can tell, all of the links in this presentation are factual and very, very concerning. Thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure you vote on October 21st. Have a wonderful, wonderful